A lot of the like overcoming adversity or whatnot, it comes with like very grandiose I'll get to the bottom of this and stuff, but at least that's the translation, right? So when you're like listening to the Japanese or you're you understand Japanese, I feel like that's kind of something that you wouldn't find in an English, like that specific type of like grandiose kind of thing happens a lot less frequently. Like I currently watching two or three continuation of shows that largely revolves around this type of thing. And when they exchange words and stuff and like subterfuge and like, you know, challenge people or make claims like, yeah, I'm not backing down, the game's not over yet, or like, you bet this is not where this ends. They don't usually go and make the more like heroic, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this, I'll keep digging, or talk in metaphor, or like talk in very like on the nail metaphors. There's a lot more nuance to the English. However, I don't know if that's how they're trying to capture the same feelings. Like I like the metaphor they use. Okuda used about how deep do the roots get in this conspiracy, right? However, those metaphors are really like right on the head. I it could be a video game thing still, because like video games tend to, it's still, I still feel that the focus is divided, right? I like to say the writing people would have backgrounds in writing, but generally speaking, uh it's not like they're getting authors, and like they're just different distributions of subset of skill work. And a lot of times writing dialogue comes off as, at least reading the English subtitles and watching their performance, I don't know if that's what they're going for when they're translating. It might just be also that the shows I watch tend to be the ones that are very well regarded as incredible writing, and might just be, the relatives and experience and whatnot. But some of the ongoing shows I watch, their scenes when they talk, like in the office room like that, when you're reading these subtitles, it leaves a little bit to be desired, but in the context of a video game series, it's still like well above average, like in terms of the localization and how they choose to have the English voice cast talk. But man, when it comes to like the bigger scheme of things, like when you leave video games and get to the bigger umbrella, room talks get incredibly, incredibly nuanced and jabby and creative. Like, what I mean by creative, I mean it feels aggressively like perceptive people being in the same room. Of course, they are emotionally compromised in these scenes, so they could talk in a very grandiose way because they're emotionally compromised, right? However, when you have like Soma, right? Soma trying to get information out of Yagami, and then the little like tit for tat stuff, that stuff, the English is like okay. I would say it's very sufficient for video games. I don't necessarily think that people who write for video games don't have the capacity to write something more nuanced. It's just that you also need to take into consideration the target audience. But for me personally, Like that scene when Yagami was tied to the chair and stuff. That scene could have gone so differently in English. Like the English exchange is incredibly well diverse, but in general, scenes like that tend to end up going in a very expected, like lay kind of conversation between foreseeably very perceptive people. Like Soma and Yagami are incredibly perceptive, and the way they talk to each other is a little bit less uh in line with how perceptive they are, in my opinion. However, it's definitely well above in terms of like video games and stuff. But some of the shows, ooh, they are good. Like they are really good. If you want to see like things that deal with crime, law and order, or people who work in law and order or are writing for like order, crimes and stuff, shows like Billions, Mr. Robot, Breaking Bad, like those shows, English is it's like every single line can be quoted and it just sticks out. There's no like overlap. When you see a quote in a specific room, you know the scene because that line is incredibly identifiable. Their characters use metaphors that really fit their character. So like Yagami, when he talks and tries to hide and do things, in English, a lot of times, since English is a descriptive language, right? Very descriptive. Um, the diction and the word choices elevate the person's personality. Like I don't typically, like for example, you can identify someone characteristically by their vocabulary. Regrettably, in my opinion, the subtitles don't necessarily do that too much. I do love it when they do though. They do some of that. I just said do again. Uh like Sukmo, right? Sukmo uh does like laughing and sometimes they throw in a vocabulary word that is very identifiable, one of the characters. However, in English, characters are incredibly identifiable by their word ordering, their word choices, how they say specific words, and how they're emphasizing specific words. And that stuff still has, in my opinion, being like a snob personal, like this is a personal opinion, being a snob of like live action and acting prowess of the Writers Guild and stuff. Just a little snobbery on my side. I think English side of things are still relatively weak if it were to bridge like the gold standards of the language. It's very different from Japanese, so I can only see them having to rework scenes like that, like entirely. Like the rigging would be really everywhere, and it's already tough synchronizing like how much time, what's the pace, and that was a pre-rendered scene, so no lip remodeling. It's just the timing. The timing window has to be similar. So, but English is very long and winded sometimes, and those scenes that are long-winded are incredible. But because this game is dual audioed, it's a pragmatic restriction. And that's whenever I see these scenes, it makes me think like I'm surrounded by like when I play video games and consume media, I'm surrounded by like very bipolar circles of people, right? There are people who think a certain perception of English speakers, but they're inherently being conditioned by this stuff, right? This is like the pragmatically speaking, probably the above average of what they could do, given that they have to present both Japanese and English. But this becomes a representation of the standards of English speakers and English language. Meanwhile, you have other people who don't consume this material because they emotionally become snobbish to this. Like, there's no way, for example, like a argument is like, there's no way a video game can be as good as a book, aka in English or etc. So in both cases, they kind of excommunicate each other without the perspective of each other. So on the one hand, video game English is still incredibly dwarfed because those who command English focuses on mechanics, like input mechanics, and then those who have storytelling as a predominant feature in their industry are restricted by cultural differences. So in most cases, there are no inherent excelling in English acting. That's kind of, it's a bittersweet thing. I mean, this is specifically, it has its charm, right? It comes off as incredibly grandiose. Like Yagami feels like he's just that guy that's always giving incredibly he's like a motivational coach the entire time, as opposed to like something else. Like he responds to grief in English very similarly to how he responds to injustice and something third person, and then like all the English seems to be very similar. And what I mean by that is it provides consistency for those who maybe don't really care as much about the characterization of characters and their story, and they're more into the game, like it's a game, right? Input stuff. But for me, it's a missed opportunity. Like Yagami could have expressed himself far different this time, because generally now he's dealing with the truth and grief at the same time, and words really change often. In English, is descriptive, so words associated with specific obstacles and stuff come out. Like, when someone is very polite or get really mad, and they're in school, they'd be like, "Oh shoot, like this really sucks," and then immediately when they leave the school, they'd be dropping f-bombs. Like even the most rudimentary things, English like shifts incredibly back and forth between situations, and you do it conditionally. Like what I mean is subconsciously or maybe consciously, a combination of them. The vocabulary constantly shifts back and forth depending on who you're talking to, and that just doesn't happen, especially in Japanese games, or like in Asian produced games, because if you're out in public, you behave consistently no matter what. Like you're you you talk as politely as you can. There's like, and then there's private time, right? And I can't understand Japanese to know if there's a vocabulary shift. I just know that the subtitles are translated in a manner that doesn't really tell you that. It doesn't show you that Yagami actually distinctively act differently through his words. So it's weird. Like that interaction when Yagami is talking to Okuda, when he's trying to empathize and show, his vocabulary didn't change. It didn't change very much from how he was talking to Soma or Akutsu. Like it's just standard vocabulary. So that's kind of something that is a little missing. Like if I were to be like a stickler for a representation of higher English, right? But that's not what the target audience is. Like we gotta keep in mind that grounded, the rationality is you get diminished return. These type of details don't really come up because let's just be honest, statistically, people who are highly educated are not playing video games. That's kind of the sentiment here. My opinion is incredibly the minority, and it probably isn't even practical to talk about, but it's something I can talk about because I absolutely love the English language. I mean, I use it as a primary source, and it's without a doubt, if you start focusing on people's vocabulary, you could even discern layers of if this person's lying or not. Like, I it's kind of humorous because coincidentally, in one of the shows, they did a theoretical thought experiment where you could train an artificial intelligence model to to analyze the pattern of vocabulary and integrate it with their tone and their cadence. And if you combine all those types of patterns, you can discern if someone is speaking out of a specific emotion. And that emotion can be very informative to say, someone who's a detective, someone who is a lawmaker, someone who's an investor, a gambler. So things all that to me is important, quote unquote. It's interesting and it's important in the portrayal of these things, but I think it's well beyond the scope of of the video game, right? Like it's I highly doubt that the vast majority of people are thinking, man, why does Yagami give an incredibly emotional, motivational coach speech in English to Okuda, someone who's incredibly his senior? Like it's however, you have to think that it's Japanese, so perhaps that's just how Japanese is portrayed. But in English, I believe the vocabulary would shift quite dramatically between the appropriateness of how Yagami tells Okuda that he's gonna get to the bottom of this. The same way that this is gonna be a little digression. I actually kind of like this digression. Maybe we'll end with this digression. So, for the same way, like when Kaito was standing over Sawa's the deceased Sawa, right? And he said like, "Hey, you know, we got to do the only thing we can do to move forward." I don't even know the exact words because those were not the words I would have expected to read, but it's educational for reading them because I wouldn't use those words, right, as an English speaker. Uh, they say like, oh, we just have to be detectives right now, right? I made a comment earlier about that. Like, yeah, we gotta. But the sentiment in this case is Kaito is the closest friend to Yagami, but Kaito is not acquainted with Sawa. So, like, what I mean is they only met once, and he fancies her. So he would use very specific type of vocabulary that illustrates his connection with Sawa and how he is trying to empathize with Yagami. But the translation and even which ends up being the voice line for the English, that sentiment about, hey, we just got to be detectives right now, comes off as really weird. Because generally speaking, that would be the time where you would use empathetic words, like words that may be not very oddly specific, but more like nebulous in my opinion. So something like, "Hey, Yagami's good," like in insisting that Kaito knows that Yagami's hurting or he's outraged. So there are plenty of words where he could express like, hey, I know you're hurting, man. There's as much as I don't know her very well, but I know you're pretty close to her. Like things that express that, while saying like we got to keep our heads on straight here, buddy, right? Because Kaito is the buddy guy, and he's the straightforward guy. So his words would be something that would try to calm Yagami down, while also giving him a bit of the like slap it straight and give it to you straight things. Like she's gone now. What we can do right now is get our heads on straight and do what we do best. Be detectives. Things like that. Like the phrasing and all that, it creates the personality. But instead, the translation and the scene and the lines feel like they're cut short, and they transition really oddly, because I think maybe in Japanese the lines, there are a lot of inferred things between the transition, but his transition was abrupt. It was like, wait a minute, what do you mean by be detectives? And then suddenly a little bit later, Yagami kind of corroborates that idea, so that it kind of feels like, oh, okay, I get it. And that in my opinion, that wouldn't be like a very natural thing to say, especially between two buddies, right? Kaito and Yagami. So then, and then when Sugiura, right? Kaito somehow kind of got over the yearbook thing, and then pulled a jab with Sugiura. It's like, well, you know, that is what you do before, right? And then he dropped like an F-bomb in there. Like, just little things like that. And it kind of, I don't think any of this is really all that it wouldn't be all that important in my opinion. Like most people uh who play these games have a standard that isn't considering these things. They don't necessarily have to. So it's not a big deal. I'm not saying the game should be written a certain way. I'm just saying that's what I think about when I see these scenes. We've already 100% this game, at least the Town Go stuff, right? And now we're reading dialogue. So we're mostly focused on the subtitles and then the tone and execution of the Japanese characters. I can't really analyze the semantics and the vocabulary, but certainly like other elements of it. But in terms of the English subtitles, it can't. I can't. It would be very. It would be very disrespectful if I were to jump to the conclusion that the people just translated it as directly as they can, without the consideration that maybe they're trying to capture the meaning of it, right? So I imagine, presuming that the way it's translated is trying to capture, and I believe this to be the case because RGG, whoever's doing the translation and stuff, all their games have like considerations to, I don't know, dialect, regional differences. They even use idioms and whatnot to capture like the equivalent emotions, but they are also restricted by uh, the portrayal of Japanese culture, or like the public culture. I guess what I'm saying is the decorum and the behaviorism of that, and that's what I read in the subtitles that help me discern, oh, this is normal for Japanese or something like that. So I'm making that presumption that, oh, in a time like this, someone would give a speech like that. It's normalized that Yagami would speak very motivationally, like you bet your balls I'm gonna get to the bottom of this or something like that, or I'll just keep digging until I get to the truth kind of thing. So all that like stuff is normalized in Japanese. And when you hear it in Japanese, it seems all right. However, then you have this double standard, right? You have people, your target audience, who largely 90% of the time watch anime or play Japanese video games that have like anime-esque stories or something that's wholly Japanese, and they come off with this notion that the English is absolutely garbage. It's terrible. It feels cringy and all that, and that's not at the expense of and that's all at the expense of those who spend a lot of time trying to translate, localize, and characters that might actually literally be what the Japanese character, or as close as they can, what the Japanese characters are expressing. So effectively, though, because it is in English, and somehow they've connected that English is the fault of, like, the language itself is the fault of being cringy. And that is harder for me to accept because of how consistently, in fact, I would make the argument that the consistency of English being mediocre in subtitle form and in auditory form for a Japanese medium should provide enough dissonance to allow someone to be aware that perhaps it goes beyond the fact that it is not an English product. Like, it is like English. When you talk to people in Japanese, you will be expressing those cringy expressions. Like, but you'll be saying them in Japanese. But as someone who's going to go on to learn Japanese, for example, a native English speaker who ends up learning Japanese, they might actually end up getting the perception that, yes, Japanese people actually do sound that cringy in context. As in, what I mean is they do sound like, hooray, let's do our best. I believe in you and you believe in me. Like a friendship thing, right? Like spirited stuff. That might actually be the thing that they're doing, that they're actually communicating. Because in English, when you see the other side of things, they don't do what the people find cringy. So what happens here is it leads to this odd situation where somehow a language becomes stupid or dumb sounding or like unappreciated without the context of knowing that it's actually probably inherited by the cultural thing they're trying to emulate. Like, English just doesn't sound great for the subtitles I just read. And these games offer an incredible, wonderful, like, I don't know, realism, perspective on that. Like, I don't think it's cringy anymore, I guess. Maybe at one point I did. When someone says, like, just believe in me, I can do this. Like, that how often that comes up, like, don't worry, I got this. Like, if you don't believe in me, I'll still do it. That kind of like tone happens a lot in Japanese dialogue. Like, I don't know about the literal Japanese, but when reading subtitles, that expression, that emotion comes up so consistently that I think that's just the closest facsimile between English and Japanese. When you have a Japanese dialogue, like when you have an English closed room dialogue where something just terribly happened, there are a lot of ways to express those things that are not those words. Like, there's just not that type of feeling. Like, you bet, I'm gonna I'm gonna find this guy. I'm gonna take him to a room and I'm gonna make him like. There's so many other ways to express it in English, in my opinion. What I mean is not like say in those specific words, but I think those people who are translating are trying their best to capture what's in the Japanese, and that's how you normalize it. But it's a shame that it's kind of the irony here, at least for me. It's kind of the most awkward thing where uh, the internet, especially, I would even say it's enriched. It's like misrepresented, or what I mean by misrepresented is like it's not intentionally misrepresented. It's conditioned and normalized that English cannot be provocative or nuanced or profound sounding than Japanese. And that's come from a pre-selection for how Japanese is often translated into English, but not the other way around. So, like, because it's a double standard, right? English is a default for inclusion, and Japanese is a subgenre. Like, what I mean is like a subgroup. So you don't, pragmatically speaking and statistically speaking, you will find more things in English or translate in English than is, and it's not fair, obviously, because it's chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like English became the language to use as a bridge gapper. It could have been a different language in a parallel universe or something if events were different and whatnot, but it is. And to recognize that means that the chances of English being in a cringy translation is way, way statistically higher than hearing a Japanese translation or like a, and I can never know really, to be fair. Like I can't even, it's still taking the world population statistically, it would still be English, but I can never know for sure because I can never be a Japanese native speaker understanding English ever again. So like it's not possible for me to express that empathy. But I would say it's probably safe to say that awkwardness is still true when Japanese people read Japanese translations of English specific storytelling. So I don't know, when they watch an MCU movie or something, or watch something from Disney, I'm sure there is that same thing. However, it is disproportionately the other way around because of English being the medium, right? Being the utility language. The last deep cut, the hot take here is that how is this important? At least to me, as a person who consumes video games and talk to other gamers, is that it really tells me how low, like what the average standard of English comprehension is for the, I don't know, the average consumer, right? And I'm not saying that they are incompetent to understand the dynamics of English. It's conditioned to be ignorant of the dynamics because it's not pragmatic. So what you don't hear, right? I've done this deep cut a couple times now. Most of the things about the English language and English comprehension and representation, especially in video games, is based on confirmation. It's not based on null hypothesis testing. So English is a less superior language in, I don't know, in anime dubs is due to confirmation bias. It's not just because it's not there doesn't mean it's worse, kind of thing. Like, oh, English is cringy here, and therefore English is bad because you have no example of when English is superior or English is more nuanced. So therefore, because you don't witness that, it's not true. That's erroneous. It's a confirmation bias. You only saw evidence to support something. This is a really good digression to lost judgment, by the way. As a detective and a lawmaker, confirmation bias is terrible because it often leads to half-truths. Truths that are still there, per se, like you observe it. Like, these are the evidence, but what isn't there, well, now we're bridging not that. We're bridging science, where when it's not there, well, you don't know if it's there. Like, you can't freaking, I'm ignorant and I'm right. Yeah, so it's so tough. What I really would, I mean, like, it costs so much money. What I'm saying is, it would cost so much money to even envision a dev group to rewrite scenes and rewrite all their characters. It's basically just having two people doing the same thing, right? But having them lift. So the greatest example, in my opinion, is in filmmaking or in TV shows, where the Japanese people, they just take the influence and make it Japanese, but the context and like the plotting and stuff stay the same. But they full stop just rewrite it in Japanese communication style. Did it lose some of the originals? Yes, it does. But what happens is you get like overall the product becomes transformative. So what's a great example in filmmaking? Well, one of the pictures of the year is Martin Scorsese's The Departed. The Departed is based on Infernal Affairs from China. And when you see those side by side, they're not even close to each other. However, the subject matter and whatnot shows how it can be done differently. So it's comforting and similar in the sense of its overarching ideas, but the nuances of both the movies are entirely different. It's to the point where when someone watched The Departed, the first thing they wouldn't think about is, wait a minute, even if they saw Infernal Affairs, it would take them a while to know that, oh, wait, why does this seem so familiar? Right? Because all the characters is redone. It's in a new location, in the United States, they're all actors, right? All of them are American actors. So they have all their nuances and their vocabulary that does not fly in Infernal Affairs. Like, I know enough Mandarin, I would say. Actually, I might have seen it in Cantonese. I can't distinguish between the two. But what I can tell you is when they talk to each other, the two casts, they're not even close. But all the events and how it unfolds were very similar. So like the main character didn't act like the main character. Like in a sense, the actions were similar, but the acting was different. The language was different. So, there's still double crosses everywhere at the same points and whatnot. So be it would be like RGG making two different games, right? They would make another game set in, I don't know, a school in New York City, and so it would be like two separate groups doing the games. So that's what I kind of mean by when I hear this stuff, it's always from the perspective like, wow, so that's what Japanese perspective is like. And that's what I mean by trying to understand developers from their perspective, not from your perspective, which happens that discussion happens way more commonly. So it's, I mean, I can empathize with it, but it's statistically the norm. So it occurs very frequently. And inherently, to me, I guess, in a as reasonable as I can, it's less interesting. Doesn't mean it's not valid or like it's not worth listening to. It's just it's less interesting because it occurs very frequently. Like someone saying like I don't know, an English speaker just like saying like, "Oh yeah, you know what will save the day? My friends." It's like, yeah, you're probably playing a Japanese game. Like that phrasing, right? And it's like that's how they express it, in my opinion. It's so consistent, that's probably how they express it. But in English, holy heck, friends, try to define friends first. Because I can tell you now, a rich story, friends, the perception of friends in any show that goes beyond like 10 episodes, that word becomes so incredibly different for every character to the point where that's not even part of the story, but you have to know. So like each character will use the same word friend, but all of them would mean differently, and they would always use specific words that are associated with a cluster of words in English that is consistent with their character. So, and that's another thing which may or may sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. I think it's safer for Japanese characters, especially subtitles. I think subtitles are far more consistent for for Japanese characters because they usually stay consistent vocabulary wise. As in, um, there are no shift in tones in English. Like, for example, if the way I speak now is nowhere in the ballpark of how I speak in like 15 to 16 different situations. One of them being like at a school, on the job, playing video games, doing physical activities, 7 different friendship circles. All the vocabulary just completely swaps. Like you don't change like, and it happens naturally. Like it's to the point where if Yagami is a detective, right? That would be that's a big thing. Like if you watch Sherlock and stuff and read those like fictional tales of deduction and whatnot, or maybe even like true crime stories, the telltale sign when it comes to English kind of stuff, which may not be applicable to Yagami here because Japanese people maybe like I imagine it is, they're far more consistent, like the way their vocabulary, so they have to read in between the lines or rely on nonverbal communication or maybe a different approach. But in English, holy heck, vocabulary choice, diction, cadence, all that stuff, it's varied enough that gives away people, like even accents. Like, yes, Japanese people would know other foreigners by their Japanese accents, but compare that to English. It's immeasurable. Like it's so incredibly nuanced that if you have a skilled person deducing things, just their word choice, their accent, how fast or slow they're talking, like all that stuff, or how their vocabulary is swapping when they're sad or happy or intrigued or something, or they're gaming, or like they're double crossing you or triple crossing you, all that stuff, that's the stuff that takes center stage in English productions. Right? It can be about business. I watch a lot of like dubious business stuff, like high level like crime stuff that, you know, what they do is they constantly try to game each other, and it's about a game of intrigue. And intrigue in English is incredibly hard to mimic without like expertise. Like one thing that I tend to harp on a little bit, because my background is in like biology, right? Like in the laboratory biology or academia, when some actor or some fictional person is a character is being made, and they are writing, you know, they're English writers, and they write, it's like you can tell when the writer isn't a person that has a background in something, or you can tell maybe they didn't have consultation or have a person who's experienced at certain things, and that tells you a little bit about what to expect and how you shouldn't be upset or be upset, because you kind of understand what they're working with, right? And this would be the case. Like, I'm not upset, it's just really interesting. Like, my mind keeps wandering off when I'm saying absolutely nothing and hearing these lines and reading the subtitles, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's that stuff. Like when a sci-fi show comes up and there's a scientist who's like, for whatever reason, emotionally compromised and do violate like 15 tenets in a matter of like 30 minutes of any scientific background chaining. Like, that's the type of thing that you can see in video games. And what you have to know is you ground yourself, say, okay, well, moving forward, you're not going to be expecting these things, right? And I'm not an expert in anything really, but I can still pick out when something is odd about the portrayal of a character. An English detective who have just experienced Yagami, like now I'm looking inward, right? Because there's no point of reference for a Japanese person on how Yagami should act. I'm presuming that's kind of acceptable, the way Yagami was translated and stuff for a Japanese person. For myself, man, that's inherently someone with Yagami's perception, prowess, and his connection with Sawa. The words that they chose, it's not the time for like grandiose metaphors about constantly digging. It's like harder metaphors, like metaphors that deal with grief, anger, and vengeance, or something like that. But would he say that to Okuda, the chairman of the school? There are ways to say that in a clever way too. I mean, I you're half kind of expecting like an art of war metaphor or something like that, but in English, just it's really important. I think it's super interesting. It also, the reason why I mention these things is I like to remind myself these things. It creates depth in consuming products. Like, I don't want to lose in touch with this. Like, experiencing things as in many dimensions as you can makes you a lot more diverse, right? It's what I would refer to as the word intellectual. Like, if your brain is speeding through and clicking and clacking through multiple takes of these things while you're consuming something, then you'll probably be able to empathize with me. I I'm sitting here not making any comments because there are a lot of comments to be made, and I've already seen this story once already, and I probably remember most of the events. But why that's what it's like, at least in my opinion, to be an intellectual. Like, you don't stop at one. If you figure out something, the next time you do it, you're gonna have something else to think about. It's not always thinking about the same exact thing. Rarely does any one experience feel like the same experience, at least personally. In, to me, if you run every single day I would say a vast majority of people would feel like it's the same thing every single day. I've ran 342 straight days, well, minus the inconsistency in Otakon, the 4 days. I ran over 300 consecutive days, and each day had a different thought, different idea when I was running. It's rarely ever the same experience. So if you can empathize with me on that, that's how I feel about listening to translations and dubs. Like, realistically though, that would also mean that I have trouble remembering what I said before, and that's kind of the whole compromise, right? If every experience is kind of nuanced in its own way, then you get to the whole symptom, I'll call it a symptom, of like attention deficit, right? Like you could say it can appear like attention deficit where, well, I don't remember the last idea I had, maybe I should write it down, and that's what I kind of do most of the time. I try my best to write my thoughts and stuff, or chronicle my thoughts in some way. I mean, I'm literally recording this, so that's kind of the idea. And the next time I play this game, it's going to be a different digression. Sometimes I make notes like, maybe this is how I reacted the first time, like reacted emotionally, and then intellectually knowing that what I'm thinking about now, which is different from the way I thought about it before, because now I have the foreknowledge that I've reacted previously similarly. So that would imply that this scene is consistent emotionally to myself, whether you have dramatic irony or you don't, that kind of thing. And that's worth time, in my opinion. Whether I remember this or not is not in my opinion, is not what I'm trying to say that's important. The take-home message to me is that if you want, in my opinion, to be someone who's incredibly diverse in problem solving or critical thinking or being a quote-unquote intellectual, that's a attempt to summarize what it's like to have to be in, I guess, in my mind, which I qualify myself as someone who is always constantly thinking about something something more. So no, life is not a grind because every single day is fundamentally and intellectually different. All the time. Even when someone says like, "Oh, I beat this game. Never going to play it again because, it's going to be the same exact experience." It's not. Like, that's not, to me, it is very difficult for me to tell you that as a human being, even if you do it 1,000 times, it is rarely going to be the same. Because if you literally kept track, you would know it's your 1,000th time you've done it. That is not your 999th time or any other number before that. So if you want to be always ready, right? Always ready, it can become really efficient. I didn't say anything about the downsides of things though. There are a lot of coping strategies or compensation strategies to make a lifestyle like that work. I'm just offering my little antidote to see if anyone else out there feel the same way. Because I watch things a lot and it always feels like, not in a bad way, it always feels like I don't have enough time to repeat things that I know. Because like doing a tutorial over again, I don't repeat it because I know, pragmatically speaking, I'm going to get diminished returns. That's how I encourage myself not to do it again. but then it goes against the whole fundamentals thing. So every time there's like coping strategies for like, oh, maybe I might have forgotten something, I should review the whole thing from beginning to end because I'll see in a new lens or something like that. That type of thing is also characteristic of someone who will constantly be able to solve problems. And I share this anecdote because if you feel like that's what's making your life a net negative, as in it feels like you're getting more L's than W's all the time, practicing that exercise for as long as you think you feel comfortable. Like, what I mean is, if it's 5 minutes, just thinking about different ideas, as many ideas you can list for like a specific problem you have, then 5 minutes is the cutoff. But what I can tell you is, as most competent humans who are born with the capacity to think, I like to believe that's 99.9% of human beings, with that 5 minutes, it will become 10 minutes, or it stays 5 minutes, but you get more in that 5 minutes, which effectively dilates the time. So there's this like really elegant observation that I'm echoing from multiple intellectuals of our time, is that the brain has this ability to dilate time. And what I mean by dilating time is maximizing what you can achieve within the time frame. So depending on your perspective, is it the literal time getting longer, you can sustain it, or how much you're processing within a fixed time? So to me, I like to do the fixed time thing because it's more attractive. Basically, if over the years, since I don't know, since I was 12, I guess, all the way up to now, like 36, the exercise that I have been trying to do most of the time is to maximize how many things I can do efficiently in the same amount of time, so that when I go to have a discussion, that the instant you offer me a topic in that time frame, so any time frame, say like this person expects a cogent response in a minute, I can maximize how many thoughts and ideas I can have in that time frame in 1 minute. And with practice, constantly doing this, eventually you'll come up with more ideas within a limited time frame as much as you can. So over time, it becomes less exhausting. And that's kind of what I'm trying to, that's the goat. That's where I'm leading to. But all that still comes back to why I'm having a random digression out of nowhere about Japanese, the intersect of Japanese and English when it comes to video games. It all leads back to that, but you know, I've already hopped like 4 different things, so we're just going back here. We're gonna finish this scene and like call it a day. This is where the digression wanted to end the day, so let's finish this scene here.
八神さんじゃないっすか。何しに来たんです？
なんかおかしいですよね。八神さんが来た途端、三越場先生が死体で見つかって、次は沢先生が殺されちゃった。まるで疫病神みたいな。
確かに。
Yeah, like that. You're the angel of death or something. Like, I get the expression, although the only angel of death vocabulary that I know is like Shinigami. She said something that had like entity, like god entity in it, but not enough to understand Japanese.
そうかもな。
Right.
みんなマジ神気臭くてだるい。沢先生って 男子受けは良かったけど授業は程度低いし大して面白くなかったし、少なくとも私は全然一緒に泣けないっすわ。偽善者っぽい。三越柴先生の時はみんなはしゃいだりしてたくせに。
おい、お前も黙ってろよ。
は？せーぞ童貞。
That's a new phrase.
んだよ。
I don't usually play Japanese games where they're aggressively like foul, like vulgar. So there are a bunch of phrases that I'm like, oh, I haven't heard that phrase before. And then the subtitle was like, oh, okay, that would explain why I haven't heard that phrase very often.
だ。
八神さん、私たちなら大丈夫です。今はわからないことだらけでみんな不安定なだけ。でもだから澤先生に何があったのか分かった時は私たちにも教えてもらえませんか？
優等生気取り。すかした顔しちゃって何？
どうしたんだよ、茜。お前変だぞ今日。
前にも言ったと思うけど、俺は探偵でさ、三越柴弘がなんで殺されたのかを調べてた。
With that said, they do the English, like the subtitles, but the English cast do end up imparting I'm gonna say like a narrow dimensional look at the character. So like I knew the words that Mitsui said there in Japanese, like the overall tone of like the literal words, and then the subtitles there. The subtitles chose certain words, exclamatories, that made it kind of feel like, oh, it's a kid, right? Like it's a bratty, like aggressive kid. That's as far as it goes, though. Like it doesn't go beyond that. Like the nuance, like for example, if Mitsui is what type of aggressive kid is he? He could be aggressive without swearing, right? Akane could be someone who's not exuding insecurity, but generally speaking, most of the time it's a character exuding insecurity. So she was like kind of being a tsundere in a way where like why are you guys all moping around? You shouldn't be, but she's like griefing or like trying to mask that she cares by being abrasive. So there are specific archetypes that they lean on a lot, and then they use the vocabulary to embellish that. So and a lot of times it's pretty like rudimentary in a sense that, oh yeah, this guy grew up in the backyards in the sticks or something. Okay, he's just gonna drop F-bombs everywhere. And that's, you might be thinking, nah, like they would be, they're so like, for every great above average game like this with English vocabulary, in my opinion, there are Japanese games that come out and they are portraying English characters, and every time it's a young character, it's like F-bombs every like three or four, just completely out of context, just consistently publicly F-bombs, just to, as an archetype, to reduce the age of the character. A great example recently, I'm sorry, Square Enix, but Forspoken is a great example of when that happens. And it happens a lot in Japanese games portraying English people, like, or people who speak English. So it's a pretty consistent thing where, like, oh, what's an example of an English person with unrefined language? Well, vulgarity. Like, well, I'm gonna be real with you. some of the big like quips and intelligent conversations do still use those words. They don't necessarily use them inanely, like superfluously, just to make someone sound uneducated. Like, I'm gonna be real. Like some of those shows, when a perceptive person drops an F-bomb, it means something. It means a lot of things. So there are I think in Japanese though, aggressive language when they're angry is consistently full stop aggressive. So when someone's angry, it can often be translated to, oh, this is an F-bomb moment, or this is a vulgarity moment, but that's not it. That's generally not what they're like. There's degrees and there's degrees and tact. Like someone can insult someone aggressively, effectively by swearing at them if they're receptive to that. But a perceptive person, if knows that if that is not going to work, they're going to use other ways to communicate an insult. Like if someone swear at me, it would be ineffective. They would probably want to try to know my vocabulary and my diction and insult me in that way so that I would get offended. So that's kind of the thing. And in games, what they do is they normalize that. So then pretty much every person who's aggressive, all they do is drop a lot of vulgar words. With the exception of, it might be unintentional, I'm not sure, but people can be incredibly threatening without having to swear every single other line or yelling every single other line. In fact, they're some of the most iconic, scariest characters in English writing are characters that don't even say words. Like, they don't even say that much. A great example would be Shiger from No Country for Old Men. Like, the words he say, they're very common words, but it's just how he said them, when he said them, and when he chooses to say those words. That's the impact, in my opinion, of English that is lost in translation. And that's kind of the phrase. That's what it means to have a loss in translation, right? But it's the other way around. And as an English speaker. So like it's a shame for me that there isn't a character, not yet anyways. Maybe, who knows? Hawaii might be different, in the eighth, sorry, I said fourth. In the eighth installment of this game, they might actually, there's a chance. I don't know. We have no idea yet. There's an American who is perceptive, and they use phrasing like that. Like things like, oh yeah, that seems pretty good. Instead of saying, oh yeah, that's right. Like there's just like, fair enough. Instead of, you're right. But there are, sure. All right. That's just, there's just so much that I can't appreciate in Japanese as well, right? I can pick up certain phrases that people say over and over again, but I think that's the same way, the other way around. So when subtitles come up, it's like, oh yeah, this guy's really angry and he's shouting really, really hard. F-bomb. That's it. Like that's how you exclaim. And I pick on vulgarity a lot because vulgarity is very it's almost a stereotype. Like what I mean is the stereotype that embellishes negativity, as in if someone swears a lot, they're very emotionally compromised, they're probably brutish, and they are lower education. I can guarantee you there are very, very highly intelligent people who opportunistically drop vulgarity in an elevated manner. Like, vulgarity can be sophisticated and eloquent. Just think about English comedy. Like, it's there a comedian can be very unfunny by dropping F-bombs, and a comedian can be incredibly funny by dropping F-bombs. So, and here in this game, actually specifically Judgment, actually, like the Judgment series, I understand that the Japanese people, like the Japanese lines and voiceovers, are like really aggressive. Like they're trying to be very dark. That also inherently increase the frequency in F-bombs. Like this is just it's so frequent that it diluted the aggressiveness. In fact, I think Soma is the most aggressive, scary character, and if I remember most of his lines and subtitles, he rarely swears. It's just the nature of his character. So, like, with all the people who just yell and you have the subtitles, like, with three, you almost see, like, you're imagining 3 exclamation marks, it's no more aggressive if they said, like, they just make a sound and that's it. Like, no English word whatsoever. They just yell. That just yell nonsense. Or like just die, right? That's what Japanese says too, right? Shine is the I think that's the term, right? So uh, this is a bit of a mixed bag. Still a bit of a mixed bag. I'm love to see what happens in Hawaii though. It's not till February though.
それで澤先生とも話してたんだ。彼女はその事件との関連で巻き込まれた可能性が高い。だから俺は先生のことも三越場のことも絶対に全部はっきりさせる。
いいよどうせ。ネットじゃ三越場先生完全に悪者じゃん。昔いじめしてたから殺されて当然だったって。
そうだな。なら俺のレポートが聞きたくなったらそん時声をかけてくれりゃいい。お前の抱えてるそのモヤモヤ晴らすには俺の仕事は役に立てると思う。
ふん、なんだよ探偵って。ああ、うさんくさ。
あいつさ、茜、三越場先生のこと好きだったんだよね。ノリも合ってたしめっちゃ話してたのに、ある日どっか消えちゃった。仲良くしてたつもりが自分の一人相撲だった。おかげでモヤモヤしっぱなし。それで自分にブレーキがかけらんなくなってったんじゃないかなって。だから今までのこと許してくれって言ってるわけじゃねえよ。
自分たちが許されないことしたってわきまえてんなら上出来だ。
Don't get me wrong. Here, I absolutely love the subtitles because it sounds like me. Like, what I mean is, every character sounds like it's like a line I would say. But knowing that means that the English is overly mature. As in, what I mean is, I was the oddball kid out. So the person who bullies me, right? Like Mitsui, right? His vocabulary is not like that. It doesn't exude someone who's incredibly emotional or someone who's like they're always speaking incredibly refined, and I actually think that's probably Japanese. Like what I mean is, I have to convince myself sometimes, and I would say most kids who like anime or maybe manga or something, they normalize that Japanese kids are incredibly mature because they always sound like a running monologue in English, right? And it could be true. Like I don't know. I I can't be a non-Asian person anymore because I sound like that when I was a kid. Like I talk about the holistic state of someone's grief and being enamored by a superior and talking about the fear of rejection and perspective shifts in, understand or gripping with the reality of loss or something. Like I actually use those words. I sound like that when I was talking when I was younger. However, in English, right, if you go to in high school in the United States, the vocabulary is very different for the average like high schooler. I mean, and what I mean by that is like I was statistically like in a minority. I mean, I was literally a minority, right? So it is very safe to say that I'm surrounded by people that don't sound like this at all in translation, in anything. So it gives the perception, and I don't know if it's true or not, because I happen to be Asian, that are all Japanese, and this is the meme, right? It's basically a meme now, or a stereotype, that Asian people are incredibly mature. Like they mature sooner or something. Somehow their culture and their maybe even genetics and biology somehow made them so that they're always mature at an advanced age. Like what I mean by that is or they are advanced in maturity at specific ages. I don't know if that's true. It could be a stereotype and a misrepresentation due to social media and perceptions, right? Because this is what you're reading. I'm reading a kid that is fully expressing and analyzing their classmates' feelings psychologically, and then holding a conversation like at a deeper level than. So is it because American kids are less mature? I don't know. But what I can tell you is this is giving you the impression that that is true. And what is the impression in high school, in my high school? Like, what was my high school experience like? I could tell you there was so much left unsaid in high school. In fact, a lot of times, I would say the vast majority of people wouldn't even know how to express what this kid is saying. And I don't know if that's what happens in Japanese schools, because for bullying and stuff, all that stuff to happen, there's a lot of things left unsaid. So it's incredibly remarkable that the kids you meet, the characters you meet in video games happen to be easily some of the most self-aware characters ever. Like they defy statistics. They also defy age barriers. And that gives a false impression. I think that gives a really false impression about Asian minorities in general, in my opinion. Not majorities, but for me specifically, Asian minorities. Like, where some people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You have to deal with life really early and stuff's like, well, I wanted to be a kid. Like, yeah, but you could handle all these things. Like, well, it would have been nice if I was included. I don't know. Like, it's hard to say anymore, right? So all these impressions are the bigger scope of things when people talk about, like, I don't want to touch upon controversial topics, but what media normalizes do matter, in my opinion, psychologically for the growth of people, especially kids. And this makes it so that, I kid you not, people who like anime or manga view as a juxtaposition to the place they grew up in. And if I could say something about being exposed to kids in the United States, is that they constantly somehow find their qualities empathetic to Japanese characters when in reality it is not. And what I mean by that is just that desire to want to be mature like these characters and experience these things, or saying I am like I am like mature, like, you know, Japanese characters and stuff. So being exposed to it may make you feel familiar to it, but your actions and stuff, when you talk to, like, I don't know, someone that's much older than you, like 40-year-old to a 16-year-old, and this kid is trying to tell you I'm like this character or I'm like these people, all generally you would see is you're an American. And it would be tough because it creates a dissonance. Like, are they really or are they not? Gaslighting, not gaslighting? Are they gaslighting themselves? Because you can gaslight yourself. Like, it works well when it does. It doesn't when it doesn't. Like things like I found out I'm an introvert or something like that. And then they base their entire life around being introverted and condition themselves to have all the behaviors that are not fulfilling their needs. For example, what do you do then? It's tough. Get them to be more sociable. Like someone who constantly say, I'm an introvert, but I want to fall in love. Whoa. Yes, sort of. You know, introversion isn't necessarily an impediment to love per se, but love requires sociable skills. And if you gaslit yourself so well, you no longer develop those skills anymore. So you basically caged yourself. And that's kind of the whole thing about representation in media. It's still just the bigger scheme of things. It's beyond the scope of RGG, right? These games. But that's what these scenes kind of remind me of. I see kids that are incredibly mature and self-aware. Like, if I was, like, for me, if I was a alive homeroom teacher, right? Man, these kids, like, holy heck, these are bullies in school? Man, heck, man. They wouldn't end up in this situation. Like they have the capacity to self-realize that, like, that is incredible. Obviously, this is also a game because video games, you want to see that your characters succeed. Realistically, though, this is what gets normalized sometimes by people, so especially kids. Like, oh, don't people always like learn from their mistakes, and why can't my friends be like the friends in fiction in these types of things? I think that's because they're not. They're generally not. So it's kind of important and kind of not. I generally like to think about that when you're consuming stuff.
ごめんな、コーダ。これまでしてきたこと全部。
This scenario right here, I would love if this is the social norm. Like, I would love this is how kids overcome like the vast majority of kids, even Asian kids, overcome their differences or even the nuanced differences. This stuff makes me weep, like inside. And sorry, I don't openly weep, but I'm a sap for this stuff because I don't see this stuff. It's so rare for me, and it's incredibly hard for me to believe that this is a distinctive thing in Japan versus in the United States. I feel like this type of situation goes beyond cultural boundaries. So it's really lovely. It's a great idealistic setting. And I'm gonna be real, I have a guilty pleasure for playing games that have uncannily perceptive characters. Because you just want everyone else to be perceptive. I love seeing people grow and, you know, become more competent about themselves, like, and others. Like, be able to achieve balance somehow instead of like spiraling into a pit of despair. So even in grief, they are able to find redemption.
一生許されないと思ってろ。それが当然なんだから。
そうっすね。
でもよく謝った。
どうも。
So good. I love these moments. I love them because they don't happen very often. Alright. That was a big, good ending digression, I would say. I don't even know what to call it, but I'll write it off somewhere. Alright, folks. Where are we? Great. Alright, folks. As always, stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. You know, if you're gonna watch this later, thanks for watching later. Always feel free to comment, share, and discuss. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, work on that net positive lifestyle, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care. Bye now.